ready for a roll call. Roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Here.
Akbari, Gunther,
Here.
Huang, here, and Weed.
Here. Please join us to salute to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah, I can do some brief housekeeping
Yes,
remarks if
please.
that works. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Alameda County Water District Board of Directors, my name is Ed Stevenson, and I would like to welcome everybody's participation. I'm the general manager of the agency. Members of the public may participate in this special board meeting by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. This special board meeting will include a workshop and a discussion of the district's activities related to emergency preparedness and response. If you are participating by Zoom, we ask that you mute your microphone unless you're speaking. It may also be placed on mute by the district secretary. The district secretary will unmute participants at the appropriate times when the board is receiving public comments. In Zoom, you'll be able to view presentation materials as they're presented to the board. At any time, you may submit a question or raise your hand in the Zoom app, and we'll be sure to give you an opportunity at the appropriate time. If you are participating by telephone audio, you may download the presentation slides from the district's website at acwd.org. Please put your phone on mute to ensure the best sound quality for everyone. Zoom allows you to use your dial pad, *6 to mute and unmute, and *9 to raise your hand. Those participating by telephone will also be given opportunities to address the board. This virtual and in-person board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. And President Weed, that completes my housekeeping message.
All right, thank you. This being a workshop, I think it's helpful if people are initially make an introduction of who they are, and not everyone has consultants who may not know who all the staff persons are and what their roles, functions are. So the general manager at Stevenson.
Yeah, staff, we can go around the table and kind of introduce ourselves. Go ahead, Marion.
I'm Marion Hsu, the Assistant District Secretary.
I'm Patrick Miyake, Legal Counsel.
I'm
Kurt.
Aziz.
Go ahead.
I'm Aziz Naqvi, filling in for our department head. I'm the IT manager.
Laura Hydrants, Director of Water Resources.
And Kurt Ahrens, Director of Operations and Maintenance.
And I'll just note too that our Director of Finance and Administration, John Wunderlich, will be joining us in a few minutes. So he's not there at the moment. And others, members of the public don't have to identify themselves unless they would like to. And our consultant team will be introduced as part of the presentation.
All right. Is there anyone else who'd like to be introduced or recognized as being present or representing an organization? Not, then let us move on to public comments. And I have a Sherry Lassick has been on and off on the, but I think fine. And then we have Kelly A, who has a hand raised. Kelly?
Okay, thank you. The one of the slides in the middle of the presentation talks about drought as an emergency situation. And it describes the current drought as beginning in 2020, which is maybe it began, 19 years ago, whatever. So yeah, everyone, there is a drought, and in the context of this meeting, most of the stuff is going to be about restoring supply, dealing with supply disruptions. But when it's a long-term drought, sometimes the supply is going to be disrupted gradually and slowly, no matter what you do, and you're going to have the appropriate response is going to be demand management. And if you look around the Bay Area, every single water agency that I've seen is all sitting around just kind of talking about using this word mandatory and if you translate that into Arabic, it would be translated as inshallah, or into Spanish, it would translate it, mandatory means mañana, means that we'll get around to doing it someday if we're lucky, if God willing. And that's not how what most people think mandatory is, but that's how it's being treated. So you know, the way they're kind of kicking the can down the road, and then you saw the end result of that yesterday in Los Angeles with 6 million residential, 6 million people living there who had their water supplier, the Metropolitan District. They were told that you're going to water 1 day a week. You're going to cut your consumption by 35% starting in a month or two. And if that doesn't work, we're going to cut you down to 0 days a week of watering your lawn, and we're going to cut your consumption some more. And this kind of you know, radical measures is what happens when there's when they've been you know, when there is no storage. They've been sloppy in their entire management and planning, and they respond by, you know, crude measures. So my point, even if you have if you have good physical facilities, there's still political things that can come in and force you to cut consumption for political reasons. And every district, including this one, needs needs to have demand management, not just on paper, but needs to know how to use it and know how to do it, so you don't disrupt your customers, you don't kill everybody's lawn, and you don't drive everybody crazy with insane radical measures. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Let me take that then under public comments on matters which are on this notice, and I think it's appropriate. Thank you. So go with the presentation.
Sure, we can move right on to item number 4, Emergency Preparedness Workshop. So this evening's workshop is the first of 2 special board meetings on this topic. And at this meeting, staff will review emergency response planning and activities to date, and we'll discuss staff's planned approach toward continuing to prepare for emergency response and recovery. Staff is interested in feedback from the board this evening regarding the board's priorities in these areas. And we plan to take that feedback back with us and review our plans and our approach, and then circle back with the board at another special workshop on this topic, tentatively scheduled for June 23rd. With that, I'll turn it over initially to our Director of Operations and Maintenance, Kurt Ahrens.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson, and members of the board. Just a quick comment before I turn it over to our presenters tonight. Emergency preparation and preparedness is sort of a never-ending effort. I remember decades ago, it was really focused on, you know, talked about emergencies, talked about earthquakes. After 9/11, it was acts of terrorism and malevolent acts. But if you look over the last couple of years at what's impacted us, we've looked at wildfires, power shutoff events, the pandemic obviously is a big impact, cyber attacks. Recently, we're dealing with supply chain issues, and all these things are threats to our operations and our ability to continue delivering water to our customers. So tonight we're going to talk about a wide range of issues. Again, it's a never-ending effort of how we prepare and respond to these things, and new threats are constantly seem to be coming at us. So we're looking forward to a good discussion and input from the board. So with that, I will turn it over to Jake Reed, our Emergency Services Officer.
Thank you, Kurt. Excuse me. So as everybody knows, we'll go ahead and talk about district's emergency preparedness efforts tonight. This is a topic I enjoy talking about very much, and as I've been warned by a few directors already, topic near very fun to them as well. So I'll try to, we'll go over an agenda, whether we stick to it or not, we'll see, but we'll try. All right, we'll start off with just going over with a few terms. Like many disciplines at our district, you know, this is a business that's got its own language. So we'll go over a few terms just to help with the understanding throughout the presentation. Then we'll move to the meat of the presentation, which is the review of our efforts to date, and then our plan moving forward. And we'll conclude with the discussion. There you go. As I said myself, I'm leading the workshop tonight. I've been at the district for about 6 years, and I'm responsible for our emergency and security services program. Ross Holloway will also be helping facilitate this workshop. He works with the Utility Response Training Associates and Scott. They have done a review of the program with myself over the last couple of months, and we'll be able to contribute greatly to the discussion at the end. And also we have some other subject matter experts to include Cindy here. My slides caught up with my speaking. Cindy here with Waterworks Engineers, who has a career of, just about everything to do with emergency preparedness of the water system, preparing for disasters, responding to them, et cetera. And also Don Bolin, who the board may remember. It's been a while since I've been up here, but he did participate in our last workshop. He is in charge of the California Utility Emergency Association. And, it's his daily routine to help those in needs in our state and throughout Western California, in particular utilities. And then Sherry, she's going to give a quick update on some grants related to disaster preparedness. Quick ground rules here I'd like to set. Security sensitive topics. As I know, we're all here in here are passionate about these topics. If we find that some questions require some detailed answers regarding our recharge water system, our potable water system, or our network, and we think it should be better be answered in a closed session, then we'll not move to one today, but we'll table that for later, and we'll schedule a closed session later. So ours and I have a good feel for what's what we're comfortable putting out to the public and what we're not. Also, if anything's like too far off the agenda, I'll probably put it over on the table as well. We will pause for questions between the different portions of this board workshop, the review, the plan moving forward. And so, everybody in here knows me, except for maybe a couple members of the public. I'm open to questions at any time, but we are trying to save them towards the end, just in case, the answers are in there somewhere before we get to the end of each portion. Acronyms, Director Sethy, I try to spell everything out on every slide, but I'm limited on room. So, but we did put a list on the back. I did use some acronyms, but at the very end of the presentation, you'll find a list of all the acronyms that we're going to say or read. All right, the district's business, what we do. You guys, everyone here has seen our business statement, mission statement a million times, but it's worth repeating because it drives everything. To provide a reliable supply of high quality water at a reasonable price to our customers. Mission essential functions, you're going to hear that term a few times throughout the presentation. Those are the functions that support the district's mission statement. The district performs over 74 functions. And of course, it's a staff of about 230 full-time employees that perform those functions. Threats and hazards. These are terms many people have. There's a lot of terms thrown around to describe disasters, but the most common used is threats and hazards. Anything that may interrupt your business. So threat or hazards, any interruption of a mission essential function caused by human nature or loss of dependency. And we talk about those three terms. What do we mean by human? And now the term is malevolent act, vandalism, cyber attacks, active shooter, terrorism, nature, and some are arguing now everything's human made and nothing's really nature made, but nature is rain, fire, lightning, drought, heat, earthquake, and then dependencies. As everybody knows, we see in the news and we know from our own issues or our own challenges here at the district, they're not so dependable anymore, to include electricity, gas, chemicals, fuel, telecom, and water. And so as Kurt opened with, there are constant threats to our business. We feel we put a great effort towards those threats to, I should say, prepare for them, mitigate them, and respond to them. And we'll discuss that right now.
During this presentation, would you want us to make comments as you go through the slides or wait until you finish?
I prefer, Director, to wait till I'm going to pause for questions. Like
right,
I'm going to do a review of efforts to date, and then I'll pause and then.
That's fine. It's your choice.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Marion. A few more terms. That's the command system. It's just that. A system through structure standardization enables leadership to respond to any threat and maintain continuity of business. It's important to talk about the incident command system because it's required by law. Two, all of our fellow agencies have implemented it or are in the process of implementing it. When I say fellow agencies, that means here locally, Fremont, Union City, Newark, and also that means with our sister water utilities out there. ICS is also a system that's interoperable amongst our local government and water utility peers. All right, so I thought this was a good graphic to include right in the beginning. When everybody hears disaster preparedness, emergency response, they have each person has a picture in their own head on what that looks like, right? So it's easier. I think this graphic is good because it breaks down, the different portions of what, hey, the big disaster happens, whatever it is, how do we deal with it? There's always the emergency response phase, which is typically like life safety issues. And then once you, not concerned about life safety issues anymore, put out all the fires, et cetera, then you go to get your business running again in some kind of systemic order. What allows for the emergency response and then the continuity of business to take place is the incident command system. That's the structure that's in place to allow for everything to happen. Okay, brief review of philosophy, district's philosophy, strategy, and approach when it comes to preparedness. District, I truly believe this, the district makes every effort to ensure the continuity of our business when faced with known and emerging threats with an emphasis on leadership, planning, capital, and training. As I was telling the contractors, I was giving them a tour here, we only have 230 district employees. When you talk about 88,000 customers, 900 miles of pipe, I think the district is quite well at taking on every effort we can to ensure the continuity of our business. Strategy, the district ensures compliance with related regulations and follows best industry practices when implementing our philosophy. And there's a list of some of the regulations and best industry practices. Title 19 is just, that's just a regulation California put in place to make sure everybody uses ICS. American Water Infrastructure Act, basically expanded on the Bioterrorism Act, or the Terrorism Act after September 11th, and asked for risk and resilience assessments and updates to emergency response plans and expanding those plans. And the California Water Code 6160, which put in place the emergency action plans for dams. So the approach we take, there are always disasters and of many kind. All disasters follow 4 phases, defined as mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So I say that to say, how do you, when you talk about any scenario that's in your head, that's gonna be very challenging for the district, how do you approach that? You kind of put everything in different buckets, and those are mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery. And that's an industry standard because, but the agencies we work with, in particular, the ones dedicated to emergency response, like Cal ES, FEMA, or the Alameda County Emergency Managers Office of Emergency Services, they have full-time staff dedicated to all those different, what we call phases of an emergency. And I thought the phases is the best way to have a format, the best format for the presentation today. And with that said, we'll start with mitigation. So when we talk about mitigation, what are we talking about? Talking about assessments, analysis and assessments. Talking about capital, and we talk about capital, talking about infrastructure, basically physical things, infrastructure, supplies, equipment, and grants. Preparedness, when we're talking about preparedness, we're talking about plans and standard operating procedures, mutual aid agreements, and training. And we have response and recovery. Response is the intelligence collection, internal responses, and also responses to others in need. And then recovery is simply another word for recovery is business continuity. They're synonymous. All right, this is the pause I talked about, Director Weed.
All right.
So any questions before I move on?
Is there any question from staff? Being none from members of the board. We raised several,
Okay, already?
of course. When we talk about the mission of the program, in a contingency environment, it strikes me that there's a change in mission, that our primary focus and requirements are to maintain fire flows and sanitary flows. Potable water is not our responsibility. It's that of the health department as a priority. So that if we can build that in. Next, I'd hope that we would look at contingency planning. Now to consider a drought to be a contingency. It's episodic. That we have a contingency element or guide in our checklists and IRPs. For example, we recently went for solar panels. I did not vote for that, feeling that we needed a 24/7 solution, not an economic solution to save us a few dollars on electrical bills. It wasn't, we had not built contingency operations into our mindset as a basic as an organization. And hopefully we can do that by having a contingency review of capital projects and acquisition of equipment and other elements that would help us build that capability to respond. And I've noted before, and it's becoming a rote deal, that there are 3 types of engineering: capital construction, operations and maintenance, and contingency. It's a different mindset, different funding, different staffing, whole different approach. And we have to be ready for all 3. And right now we have operations and maintenance and capital construction. We've not identified contingency operations as a different way of doing business. Thank you.
President Weed, I need to make an announcement. I'm feeling extremely ill right now. I had a pneumonia booster shot and a shingle shot in 2 different shoulders, and I came here for an earlier meeting this afternoon. I have never excused myself in 12 years from a meeting on the board, but I'm shaking right now and feeling really ill, and I think I need to go home. Jake, I read through your presentation this morning, and my only questions, I think it's an excellent presentation, as I told you earlier. My only questions are related at the end of the presentation to FEMA's building resilient communities and and any of the available grant money that we can get from that program, which I've brought up in past board meetings.
Yeah.
But I'm very sorry. This is the first time in 12 years I've had to do this, but I need to leave this meeting.
Right. Thanks for your compliments. We all understand you need to leave, and we'll get you the information.
I'll be fine. Sorry, John.
Thank you. That's fine.
No, I can try.
The good news is your immune system works, Director.
No.
So I have to pause and look at
Obviously.
Pat and Director Weed and Ed when he gets back. And
Health and preservation. So let us continue the workshop. I think Ed has been briefed on much of this. And so there needs to be a catch up. So we've got a lot of people here. And
Pat, is that, I don't know the formalities of. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you have a quorum of the board. You may continue.
Continue the
suggestion.
workshop and continue your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we made note of your comments, Director Weed. I think I could speak to him further at the end and during discussion. We have discussed a couple of those comments.
Okay.
We'll discuss them further if that's fine.
No, that's fine. The only other aspect is that the contingency response, as I mentioned, it is the entire organization that needs to be restructured and repurposed.
Right.
And understanding that as a basic element is important as we approach these. It's not just responding to a fire or a specific incident.
Understood.
It's restructuring your entire entity
Right.
and new sources of financing. It's a different way to think. and operate. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions before we move on? All right. All right, so now we're into reviewing our efforts today. Some of this may be familiar, some may not, but it's all worth covering. So getting into the format of the phases of a disaster. So with mitigation, here are some assessments the district has conducted. The 2008 seismic vulnerability assessment that put in place a lot of projects that have been completed since. 2016 HAZUS, that is just a FEMA-based risk assessment that put in place our local hazard mitigation plan. And then the 2020 RAMCAP, or risk assessment for management capital asset protection. That's the process we chose when the AWIA requirement came about to do a risk assessment. And then the 2020 business impact analysis, which was the basis for the district business continuity plan. Capital, some efforts in capital to date. As many in here know, the seismic upgrades to the mains tied to the vulnerability assessment, along with the valves and lay flat hose to jump the mains and a distribution system repair parts. In addition, some other capital efforts are some communication systems that are in place to include what's in front of you, those computers and cell phones, a very high frequency radio system, and a rapid area notification system. You know, today I put computers and cell phones because people like to, you know, especially communications, people that have a lot of interest in communications like to think of all these complicated things that are out there. But really what it comes down to today, no matter if it's emergency or not, what people respond to is what they use daily for communication. And daily, our most common form of communication is email. And as you know, it's through the cell phone and the computer now today. Our rapid area notification system, we actually hadn't used it much until the last couple of years. But it is a system that we own and allows us to broadcast any message at any time via various forms, include email, phone calls, and text messages. Grants that are tied to disaster preparedness are public assistance, which is just a fancy word for reimbursement. Going back to the FEMA reimbursement we were talking about, that's the technical name for it, is public assistance. And then pre-disaster hazard mitigation grants and post-disaster hazard mitigation grants. The district has applied for and obtained public assistance in the past. As recent as 2017, we closed out 2 of those projects. The third one's still open and it's being closed right now. Sherry from West Yost, she'll talk to our pre and post disaster mitigation grants, what we currently have applied to for and what's in the hopper a little bit later. And then we'll get that information, Director Sethy. All right, plans and SOPs. So when we talk about preparedness, we're talking about plans and standard operating procedures. Here's a list of district plans we have in place. 2016 hazard mitigation plan. The end product of that is an action item of mitigation actions they're all actions to help ensure the continuity of our business. That's what it comes down to. Our 2020 emergency response plan, that was the plan I was talking about earlier that was updated and expanded. In particular, there's focus put into section 4, the concept of operations. We didn't have a concept of operations before. And then section 6, the communications plan, which we didn't have before. And then identifying district EOC and ICS teams. And we have our tactical worksheet that we developed. Took about a year to develop that. The DMD uses daily, and that ties into both leadership and cost reimbursement. The worksheet, like I said, is used daily. Any utility worker, no matter how much experience, can really use it to respond to any scale of a leak in our system. And also is designed to be used throughout the industry. So in mutual aid need, there's a form that can be used as we bring in more utility workers to assist with repairs of leaks. And it documents everything. Frankly, just not a whole bunch was documented before. And now every maintenance, everything we have to maintain every day in DMD is documented. And the dam emergency action plans, no pun intended. We've completed one and are currently getting ready to submit a couple more. It's been challenging, but CalES has been working with us, and we're trying to get the most benefit out of this, legally mandated requirement. And then we have the urban water management plan, which I think provides a lot of answers to the first questions that came up earlier. And then the IT disaster recovery plan. So another graphic I thought to include that, again, I like these graphics that tie everything together. So district-wide, we have a lot of plans in place. And ultimately, they're all to ensure the continuity of our business, no matter what Mother Nature or mankind throws at us, to make sure that we can respond and recover. To include the hazard mitigation plan, standard operating procedures, our emergency response plan, our business continuity plan. So I thought to take some time here to just review some mutual aid efforts to date. I should say mutual aid organizations and some efforts to date. We have agreements with every organization there is. So some of these organizations we've used for small to medium scale responses. Some of them we haven't had to use, fortunately. So California Utility Emergency Association is an organization out of Sacramento, and Don Bolin, who's on the line now, will speak to a little bit later. How does that apply to our district? I would definitely look to CVA during a large scale disaster. They'd be the first mutual aid organization to look to. They could pretty much provide anything. We also have CalWarn. Many people here are familiar with CalWarn. Their use, how they apply to the district, we use them more small to medium scale emergencies. And then we have Alameda County Emergency Management Association. It's less of a technical expertise that they provide for mutual aid. They provide mutual aid for management leadership, like in EOC level positions. And of course, we have some interties with Hayward and Milpitas, so we can take water from their system if need be. And then we have a training agreement with Fremont Fire Department. And here's a couple photos, some examples of mutual aid in the last couple of years. This has been a busy few years. On the left, you see there, you see Adam. He's actually in the courtyard of Paradise Irrigation District. I thought that was a great photo to share for multiple reasons when you talk about everything regarding disasters. Adam wanted to take that photo. He insisted because he's like, I want to stand in front of those burnt out backhoes. As it shows that when a disaster comes, it affects a large scale disaster can affect everything. And as everybody knows, it did in Paradise. When the fire came through, it burned out their headquarters and their corporation yard and the homes that their employees owned. And so, you show up to work, that's what you have. You have a system that's bleeding out and it's also getting contaminated and you don't even have a backhoe that runs. I also thought a good takeaway in this picture was Jim, who's next to Adam in that photo. He, at the time, was the operations manager, and Jim was like the equivalent of our meter shop supervisor here before the disaster happened. And then after employees' homes burned down and the system started bleeding, he basically was field promoted to our equivalent of Kurt, like overnight. He went from being a meter shop supervisor to an operations and maintenance manager. So again, I think that scenario just shows how in-depth planning has to be. On the right is it's related to the same disaster, the fire that swept through Paradise. That's Butte County's EOC. Through Alameda County, our operational area, they sent out, Butte County sent out many requests to staff their EOC. And we were able to fulfill that with Leo, Leonard Asher in our Water Resources Department. He went up there and worked in the planning section. I should say the Picture on the left, that was through Cal Warren. The picture on the right, that was through our operational area. And here's a review of the training the district conducts. Training can be broken down to individual, collective, and to exercises. You know, we have to scale the training. We've had multiple district employees attend ICS training through the years, though there's been a pause in all training for the last couple of years due to the pandemic. But that training, sending employees to position-specific ICS courses has already paid off, and we'll continue to send employees. There's also collective training. This is the routine training we offer here at the district with orientation and our routine training at TP2. You know, with TP2, we shut it down once a year to do maintenance, and then since it's shut down, it offers a very rare chance to train our operators. You know, our operators are just never free. They work or they don't, and they work all 3 shifts to keep the system running 24/7. So an example of training we offered there was a couple of years ago. This thing, public safety power shutoff, was new, and there wasn't much information flow, and all of a sudden some facilities lost power, and we have to figure out what to do. So we turned that into a tabletop and helped us prepare for the next year and then the next year until we started getting better information flow from PG&E. Exercises. Been a while since we've had a large scale exercise. The last large scale exercise we had was the Yellow Command, which was part of the county's urban shield. We've had recent exercises at TP2, joint exercise with Fremont Fire and district staff. And then we have annual exercises with SFPUC and DWR. They invite all their contractors, stakeholders up, and they generally, you know, run a tabletop scenario. And it usually involves us losing that source of water to our district. Okay, we're talking about response. I thought I definitely want to take some time to hit on the intelligence sources the district has, or just information collection, however you want to phrase it, just to let everybody know. I think most of the, I'm sure exec staff know, but definitely let the board know and the public know, with all that's going on in the world, that we are informed, and being informed is a big piece of staying in business. With routine operations, you know, we have our office O&M operations and maintenance office assistants. So, you know, we have a system here that was designed quite a long time ago, and technology doesn't really help, hasn't really caught up with information flow. We still rely on our customers a lot. And daily we get calls in regarding, you know, taste and odor or water quality, leaks, etc. The office assistants are an invaluable part of our operations for sure. And then we have our treatment plant and facility operators who receive data 24/7 from our supervisory control and data acquisition, or SCADA. You know, it's the system, the digital system that monitors our potable water system. Also, many of us are signed up in Nixle. So much that I find out 3 or 4 times, which is better than not finding out. When something happens in Fremont, Union City, or Newark, their Nixle is it's a public, it's a free RAN system is what it is. We have our own proprietary one, and Nixle's the equivalent of it. Again, another source of information flow. Alameda County Emergency Management Association, as we were actually talking about that a little bit, while we were eating our sandwiches. You know, they play a big role on, after a disaster, on really on two points, 2 things really affect the district. One, they sum up totals and send to the state so the governor knows whether he should do a disaster declaration or not. So after any disaster, they ask, hey, were you affected? If so, how much were the costs? And also they play a big role with, they have the Joint Information Center, JIC, which is where all the public affairs people throughout Alameda County, to include ours, Shireen and Renee, can synchronize the information to ensure that we're all putting out the same message. The Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. The Northern California Regional Intelligence Center and NCRIC and DHS CISA, Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. Those are very active agencies right now. They get a lot of their information from, the 3-letter federal agencies, and, due to, in particular, the war in Ukraine and arguably expanding now in Poland. There's a lot of threats, in particular in the digital world, and they provide us with, how those threat actors reach systems. They provide that information, and ours and his staff are always on top of it on, checking, and then 99% of the time confirming that, yeah, we don't have that vulnerability. Also, Water ISAC, it's basically a clearinghouse. In case we miss anything from anybody else, Water ISAC sends us emails as well on any information we may need. And these are what I call our types of responses, and our first responders are who goes and make sure that our daily, I should say, when we talk about emergencies, I talk about 3 scales of district deals with: small, medium, and large. These are types of emergencies we have, and obviously the related staffing that deals with them. Our production division, as I was stating earlier, their emergencies generally come through SCADA, and then they have to go respond accordingly, whether it's a pump or it's a treatment facility or a tank or whatever. And then DMD, who really all their effort goes into our distribution system, in particular our pipes and our valves, and our meters. And then we have FMD, who are our first responders to any issues with electrical, mechanical, or our instruments. I was just talking about IT. I think IT is probably the most under the radar. Sorry, ours is to bring you up again, but we think of what we see often when we think of the district responding to emergencies, like a big sinkhole or a tank that went offline. But IT deals with a lot of stuff behind the scenes. More and more, everything's going digital in this world, and that means more and more threats, essentially. And then water supply and planning, Laura's water controllers, they're our first responders out there in the recharge area. Some example of all those work groups and some medium scale responses they respond to, like DMD's sinkholes, flooding, FMD, power outages, IT system application errors, water controllers, contamination, floods, fires, and then some large scale incidents that everyone here is pretty familiar with. The pandemic, which really, like everything else in the district, put our preparedness efforts like fast forward. It goes without saying it affected everybody. And then the SCU complex, for those that may have a few cobwebs, that was a fire that came east of Mission Peak a few years ago, actually where Director Sethy received a warning to evacuate, and our old general manager received a warning to evacuate, and also threatened a few tanks in a decommissioned treatment facility. And then the drought. We just finished one, and then on to the next. Again, these are some pictures here again to kind of tie everything together and show some examples of many things, mainly our capabilities and what we do. On the left, you see the sinkhole in Union City. I thought that's a great photo because it just shows how complex these incidents can suddenly appear. These complex incidents can suddenly appear. If you look at that photo, you'll see the backhoe on the back, and then our main is actually the one that's broken, going from like bottom to top. The main was broken by a PG&E contractor. And then that orange pipe is actually USD, Union Sanitary District's main. And then you see that white conduit, that's City of Union City's conduit where they keep their electrical wires in. And then the backhoe is actually on Union Pacific Railroad tracks. So, this, of course, there's traffic control provided by Union City Police Department. Very complex incident, not to mention, that's a decent sized hole. We only have 36 utility workers. So that automatically just pushes everything there off to the side, and they got to focus on that, and the different shifts and different op periods they have to work until water flow is restored. On the right is that's a picture of our dean, who we sent to support the utility unit or utility section within the operations section of CAL FIRE's base camp at the Pleasanton Fairgrounds. So when I initially got the warning from Fremont Fire, the warning that they were going to give a warning order that affected our facilities, and turns out some of our employees' homes, the first thing you want is good information flow. And so, and it wasn't just us. We sent Dean over to base camp. Over there in the corner, you'll see there's a PG&E rep, there's a DWR rep, and a SFPUC rep as well. And moving on to the recovery phase of a disaster, I just wanted to highlight again that we did complete a business continuity plan and got a concept of operations in that plan. And we did prioritize the mission essential functions. Actually use that plan not so much as design, it's really designed for when you lose a function, then you know how to prioritize them and get them operational again. But when the pandemic hit, there's a lot of unknowns. We didn't like all of a sudden have everybody infected. We just weren't sure what was going to go on like the rest of the world. And so we did have to use Chapter 3. We did refer to it because it prioritized our mission of essential functions. And, no surprise, our most critical function is our treatment operators. And so we looked at those functions and other functions and began deepening our bench strength really quickly. And we figured out that we needed to rely on, either contractors, mutual aid, retired annuitants, or in a case with our treatment operators, start cross-train, which we did. So, and I talked about public assistance. So that's a wrap. I've been yapping up here for a while. Take a break. Any questions?
Questions, Mr. Gunther? Staff? No, a couple of quick comments. Having worked this in the past, I've never felt comfortable using the word plan when we talk about contingencies. And it's always the ability to develop capacities and protocols to respond to an unknown event. That next, we have an emphasis here, struck me in our presentation, on our organic capabilities. But in truth, it's our ability to manage and gainfully employ outside resources. And that is really the challenge you have. And hopefully we can give some emphasis on how we can gainfully, you'll have all the resources you can gainfully employ. And to that end, hopefully we take that as the concept. And the second part of that is you may have no organic capabilities to speak of at all after a major event. So it'll be solely trying to repurpose an organization. That is a different way to think. And I'm not certain we're there, or that the industry as a whole is there. No, thank you.
So just for clarification, Director, on your comment on plans and.
We use the word plan, which is an easy document and everyone uses it almost universally. But in truth, a plan assumes that you know what the parameters are and what you're planning to. In a contingency environment, you have to develop capacities and capabilities and protocols to respond to the unknown, and sometimes the unknown unknown. And so how do you address that? It really puts you into a different frame of reference than our traditional engineering, O&M, and capital construction. That, I don't know that we've gotten that mindset that has been recognized yet in our approach.
Yeah, I think one, I'll say, I was surprised when I was employed in here, how far we go with redundancy in everything we do. But I'm not arguing, and I'm not saying we're completely there.
Let me give you an example.
I'm just talking about our mindset you're talking about, that it is definitely a district mindset to, have those contingency thoughts come into play. Now, I'm sure we may miss a thing here or two. We do have some new employees as well, not to blame them, but it is part of the mindset. What were we gonna say? Ross? Oh, I thought you said you had something.
Well, when I talked to you.
Okay.
Okay. Let me suggest an approach.
Okay,
If you were, our worst case scenario might well be an earthquake. We've suggested 1,200 main breaks. How do you address 1,200 main breaks? Ideally 30 days with full information to the public as an organization with anywhere from about half the current capacity of personnel that we currently have. What would that take? And once you go through that, you start to realize how the scale that you're going to need, identifying properties. The resources are not just the traditional Cal Warren or even FEMA, it's bringing in people, even the military, on an international response potentially. And how do you gainfully employ them? How do you feed them? How do you take care of them? How do you communicate with them? Having that capacity and that infrastructure so you can do it is something that I don't know that any district in California is currently prepped for.
right. Okay, so to your point about managing mutual aid, that's a good point. And I need to document that. And we do have some planned updates coming up. And, we've come a long ways in preparing ourselves, but to prepare ourselves to manage others is a whole nother thing. And I agree. I can include that in the next plan update. That's that's needed. And then as far as backwards planning for the earthquake scenario, now
it's more of the scale. You're not going to go into any detail, but then once you establish that, then you set up the protocols and procedures for reviewing your capital construction program. Are you putting in projects that have a contingency capability? Is there a checklist on that?
right,
We saw that in the solar versus natural gas for supplemental energy. It's just it's trying to make the transition to a different framework. And I can give you some protocols. On the area of public communication, we have a fear of sharing our operations and having the public look at our graphic information systems. But I would argue that in a true contingency, you want to open that up to the public. You want the public to be able to go in and look at where you're working, what you have to do, and where they might fit into the overall schedule. So the traditional mindset of security, I believe, goes away. Those are the type of paradigm shifts that hopefully we can implement.
Right, but Director Weed, if I may, I think what you're talking about will be in a very large incident. In that case, the ICS, the Incident Command System, kicks in, and you have all the appropriate departments, including information sharing, which actually our PIO participated in the last ICS activation, I believe, when the creek flooded. So you're correct. There is the, how do you address the unknown? But at some point, you do your best to identify risk. You mitigate as much of the risk as you can. And you just have to rely on the incident command system to scale up or down your responses and bring the appropriate resources.
If you have built in the capability to do that.
I think it does have that
That means a
capability.
marshaling area. That
we
means,
do, we can,
et cetera, that you can have already pre-identified so that you
Yeah.
can scale into it.
we could go, to answer your question, we could go further with it though.
Pardon?
We could go further with documenting the capability and training on it. And
Yeah.
I've made note of that. As far as, now that, there's suggestions here that give direct benefit just to one thing, and then suggestions that will give benefit to multiple threats to our business. So the mutual aid one, will give us many wins in planning to support that. As far as the 1,200 main breaks, I think during the discussion, we could revisit that, Director. I get your concern. I get the paradigm shift. I get the planning. But that could be, that can be quite an effort in itself to backwards plan for that specific scenario, and I'm not against it, but let's just table that for the discussion portion.
And I would note one other thing is we've not
Okay.
mentioned financing, which is a principle, and we've done some great things there. We have a line of credit, $10 million can be read with an understanding it can be expanded to 50 million. So we can get the money necessary to fully implement it. Restructuring our entire financial accounting system so that we can document and get reimbursed. That's in place, and it should be reflected in your contingency response documentation.
And I don't recall off the top of my head what, I know we have a line of credit. I don't recall how much.
That's significant. So
Yeah.
we, those are, but it should be one of the elements in your financial, in your contingency response, is to have a section
Right.
on how have restructured our finances or will restructure our finances.
So maybe I could add a couple of comments on that. We do have an existing unsecured $10 million line of credit. That's correct. And it's been structured with our banking partner in such a way that it could be expanded quickly if needed. You know, we've never really talked about a specific cap to what it would be. So I can't really offer a comment on the 50 million, but I would be pretty confident to say we could go even higher than that if we needed to. And then in regard to our accounting structure, you know, we have internal processes and procedures already in place to set up what we refer to internally as jobs. And that could be created very quickly for any sort of emergency response effort, and costs and staff time would be charged to that. It's something that staff within the district are already very familiar with for, say, like capital projects or things like that. It would follow a similar type of process.
So it's in place. It's just a matter of capturing it and putting it into your,
That's what I was just gonna tell you. Yeah. It's in place, and even further detail than that, we have people that have sought reimbursement and understand the needs and understand the processes with FEMA and CalWES.
yeah.
It's
And
just
this,
putting it into the document.
and those same agreements with so many of the suppliers of base rock or whatever it might be, that we can get the vehicles or whatever the support we need to continue our operation with a priority. Because there's going to be a lot of people looking for the same resources at that time. So those are the protocols that I'm speaking of, as opposed to, and you don't, in the understanding and agreements with them. Another aspect of this is the repurposing of the entire organization. So we have a conservation staff. Their role changes. They're now into community engagement and expressing to people, trying to get the message out to people that they defecate into a plastic bag and leave it at the curb. Those type of issues are not part of the general mindset, and I don't know that we even have the canned public information to go out to the public on how to respond when they don't have water service. Those are
So we
it's
have,
part of the change in our whole way we do business.
yeah, we do have pre-scripted public information messages for our potable system. Right, that's, I mean, for our business, for many scenarios. And so, yeah, we're comfortable with seeing those messages. We're comfortable using our system and seeing the message of need. You know, we're not, I mean, that's a huge responsibility to ensure that
Okay.
there's
No, it's
public's
fine.
aware of the current, you know, flow and quality of the water.
No, you've done some great work, particularly in recent years, in risk assessment. And we're checking the boxes on the standard forms. But there is another element to this, I believe, which is the change in mindset as an organization. And that's how do we get that and put in place?
Sounds good. Okay, so one more thing. I just wasn't sure where you're going with the GIS comment. Like, I know Aras and I are pretty much on the same page with what we release. I'm just trying to see where that came from. Were you told
Well,
at one
if I
time
were
we
looked
don't
to-
share it, or?
I would argue that if we were to look into a contingency operations, we find that maybe that would be a better way to do business.
Okay.
For example, we have a groundwater reservoir that we have not identified. We've abandoned some our wells that we once had for providing fire flows and fire to hook up a fire truck to our arc wells. We've taken them out of service. It wouldn't be that hard to put them back in. Being able to recognize that you're going to lose your distribution system. It'll be a while before you bring it back up. But how do we recover sanitary flows and fire flows? And how do we get that information out to the public of how we're doing and and how it's going along on an ongoing basis? That runs counter to the normal way we do business, which is a very secure fear of outside information, et cetera. We've got to open our doors and let everybody know what we're doing and how we're doing it. That's the change. That is one of those paradigm shifts when you go into contingencies.
Understood.
My take.
All right, no problem. I assure you got the leadership in place for those paradigm shifts. We'll get there.
Thank you.
All right. Plan moving forward. Now it's time to hand it over to Ross.
I gotta talk about the plan.
The plan.
After the comments about planning. I'm a planner. I've been a planner most of my career, so and I can appreciate it. And that was a great discussion, and I will try to pick up on some of the questions and points as I kind of go through this, because I think they're very relevant. So just first from an overarching standpoint, so Scott Holmquist and I from Utility Response Training Associates and Cindy did a kind of a deep look at your current plans and preparedness and response, the business continuity, the emergency response plan. So the things we're going to talk about here kind of come from some observations we made. And I want to pick up on something actually that Kurt said in his introductory remarks. It's kind of, planning never ends, right? We develop plans, but you need to look at all these plans as adaptive plans, right? The threats do change. If you think about the threat of cyber attack, that wasn't even on our radar screen, right? 20 years ago, or at least it might have been in like a military context, but not the rest of us. So, and even, the wildfire arena that Scott came out of, I mean, it's always been around in California as a threat, but I'd say everybody agrees the level has gone up, right, in the last 10 or 15 years as you've had worse and worse seasons. So plans have to be refreshed. So those assessments you do are the key to that. Periodically updating those assessments and making sure they're current, because that's really what the plans need to reflect, is the things that are unveiled in those assessments. So I think there's some specific examples there. Jake talked about them. Seismic study, the risk and resiliency assessment, and the hazardous work, the FEMA program. So it sounds like the plan is to update those. And I think our advice would be do that periodically, establish, I don't know what the frequency is, a number of years. I do know that COVID has, kind of interrupted a lot of frequencies of things, the last few years. So we would hope to get those, a plan to update those. And, I could stand here and click this thing endlessly, but I think I'm just going to ask you to go to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to talk about some thoughts in three different areas: mitigation, preparedness, and response. And there's probably a little bit of a gray area between some of the mitigation and preparedness pieces, but we'll just deal with that. So first in the area of kind of capital infrastructure and equipment, I think one thing that we've seen and I think is important is you really take those assessments and take a hard look at what kind of additional equipment should you have available. And we were given a tour of your warehouse earlier. There's a lot of stuff out there, your big inventory. Is it enough to deal with a moderate, disaster? So figuring that out as you move forward to those assessments, we think is a key piece of business. Thoroughly researching and taking advantage of the grants that are available. And Jake talked about the categories in terms of what's there currently. And I think we're going to have Sherry maybe weigh in with a little more detail on that. Jake, is she available to do that? Sherry, can you unmute and maybe give us a little more information on those three categories of grants and what might be in the pipeline there?
Yes, I can discuss that a little bit.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, great. The public assistance, as Jake described, that's basically a disaster has occurred, you've suffered some damage, and you're looking for the funds to make the repairs to the damaged asset. So that's what public assistance is for. The pre-disaster hazard mitigation, it used to be called that specifically. Now there's two categories. It's called BRIC and FMA. BRIC is building resilient infrastructure and communities, and the FMA is flood mitigation assistance. And then post-disaster, what that refers to is the hazard mitigation grant program. And what triggers that is in the event of a presidentially declared disaster, funding is triggered under the hazard mitigation grant program to allow other entities and the ones sustaining harm also during a disaster to use federal funds to mitigate potential damages under a future disaster. I hope that's helpful. So under BRIC and HMGP are similar in the, however, BRIC is an annual program. It's issued directly out of FEMA. However, applicants are states. And so the way the process works under both the pre-disaster program and the post-disaster programs is applicants, local agencies submit a sub-application to the state reviews it first, and then the state bundles all of these sub-applications together and submits it as one large application to FEMA to review. So it's a multi-step process. What we've been doing so far is with the district, we've been submitting some seismic retrofit type projects under the hazard mitigation grant program. And what triggered that mitigation effort was, or funding source, is the various fires that have been happening across the state. We did submit one application also to BRIC, but it wasn't selected for funding. We submitted the application at the request of Cal OES, the Office of Emergency Services. It was the first year that BRIC came out. But anyway, so we're still kind of learning BRIC. BRIC is very large and it tries to be much more community focused there, whereas hazard mitigation is much more kind of project focused. It's hard to discern the differences between the two, but there are some. BRIC likes to have nature-based solutions that are community-based, brings in multiple partners. Those are some highlights anyway.
Okay. We have two current applications out there. Do we have any in the hopper?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
For the hazard mitigation?
You're gonna have to talk into a mic, Jake.
Oh, sorry. Just for just a recollection where we're at, I think we have two current hazard mitigation grant applications that have been submitted, right? And do we have any that are in the hopper?
We have 4 that have been submitted. So one is a planning effort. It's called Advanced Assistance. And the other 3 are project applications. So 2 of them have been advanced to FEMA review, and we're hopeful that we'll be hearing back very soon. It seems the initial feedback is very positive about moving forward with funding. And then the other 2 we just submitted on April 8th. So it'll be a bit before we hear back on this.
Okay. Any questions for Sherry? Before we move off that? If not, and I think FEMA grants are something that I know Scott and I both have probably a fair amount of experience with dealing with over the years in our wildfire world. And I don't know, we'll talk about training a little bit later, but certainly from the finance standpoint, it's an area where it's good to good to have some training on how to administer those and the kind of record keeping that is required. It will smooth things greatly should you get in that situation with a disaster declaration and a female eligibility. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about some other areas. Communication systems obviously is something that can be impacted or disrupted when we have disasters and incidents. And so I think ensuring that your communication systems are up to date and redundant is something to put some focus on moving forward. And I think they probably are redundant, but I think technology advances and changes, and it's always good to review those periodically and see what needs to be updated. I think you've got a VHS system now and some backups. So we do have, if we get questions on that, I'm gonna send them over to Scott Holmquist's way. He's a qualified communications person in the incident command world, so he can give you the details on things there. And we can move on to the next one. I'm going to dwell on this one a little bit. I think it ties back to this idea of adaptive management. But you do have a requirement to periodically update your emergency response plan. And I would say the business continuity plan, there's overlap, and there's areas that both plans address. And so I think one of the things that we focused on when we were looking at them was some clarifications in there, making sure those two are consistent throughout, particularly in concept of operations and in the crisis communication sections. We felt there could be more clarity there. And that's frankly normal for organizations that are, your primary mission is not emergency response. You don't get a lot of practice necessarily implementing the plans. And so it's not uncommon to look at, for somebody like Scott and I to look at them and say, oh, this could probably be tuned up a little bit. So that's a good thing. Kind of coming back to some of the comments earlier about contingency planning and specific threats and getting some more specific planning in place. I think the annexes, it's Annex B, I believe it's in the, is that in the ERP or the business continuity plan? Yeah, in your emergency response plan, there's a Annex B, which is specific threats. And a good place to put threat specific response and recovery information. So for some of those threats that are potentially more catastrophic, like earthquake, you could have more details in there about contingency plans and different mechanisms to employ. So I think that's something that we would recommend. And then training, and this is an interesting one. So I heard the comments about repurposing your organization. That is what the incident command system does. That's what it is. It's you drop your regular stuff and you implement a different organization, one that's designed to respond to unknown things that might happen, as well as anticipated threats or disasters. So that's what that system is. I worked in an agency for over 30 years. And I wasn't an emergency responder day to day, but when the incident management team went out, I dropped that regular job and I put on the planning section chief hat. Didn't matter what the incident was, hurricane, fire, flood. We figured out what had to be accomplished and we repurposed everything and we did it. So that's what that system is. And I think Director Huang's comments were spot on in that regard. So when we think about training, can an organization like this afford to train everybody to be fully qualified incident command system? Probably not. But I think, there is some focus training that can be done. And so a formalized training and exercise program that really figures out what are the core capabilities that would make you successful in that situation, I think is what you need to look at. You've got a lot of cooperators that you are working with that can help you with that. You guys do stuff with Fremont Fire Department and some of the other cooperators and responders in this area. But again, you don't get good at emergency response unless you do it a lot. And you guys don't want to do it a lot, right? So you got to find other ways to kind of build that capacity and maybe rely on some others to come in and help when that happens. And I think that may take us to mutual aid. I guess the next slide. Oh, actually, we got some photos of different things you've done, examples of training. I don't know, did you want to elaborate on any of these, Jake? Yeah, come on up.
I just thought to share some of these photos because this training just takes place at, it doesn't get announced as part of the routine stuff. So at TP2 there, Fremont Fire gave a hazmat response training course to us. So the scenario was a dangerous chemical leak in TP2. And it was a 3-day course, 1 day of instruction, 2 days of a scenario. And yeah, it was good training and training we look forward to doing again. Essentially, our operators and the local firefighters learned how to work in a unified command to respond to a serious leak. And on the right is just Fremont Fire by themselves at TP1 doing some confined space training, which has benefits for all. A lot of our staff works in confined spaces daily. And then below is Union City SWAT team. They use different facilities depending on what they're training for, but the leader of their SWAT team is their critical infrastructure lead. And so it's a win-win for both agencies when they get to know our facilities and our staff and train on it for multiple reasons. So just thought to share some training that's take place.
Yeah, I think those are good examples. I think one of the benefits of that, in my mind, is when you do that kind of training interaction with those emergency response organizations like the SWAT team or the fire department, you're building those relationships. And if you guys get in a place where you need to spin up a significant incident management organization, chances are they'd have some people that could plug in and help you do that. So as coaches or as actual players in that. So the last thing we're going to talk about is response. If you want to pop to that. Well, we actually got a couple more things, but the next slide we'll talk about response. And I thought when Jake was going through his material, he talked about small, medium, and then of course there are the potential large scale responses. And a lot of organizations plan and think about ICS in the context of large responses, right? And it works very well there, and that's it's good for that. In my experience, organizations that don't have a lot of incidents need to look for other opportunities to get proficient in ICS. And your day-to-day responses that you might call incidents, they're small scale. Maybe somebody's only going to go out for a couple hours and take care of something. To start changing your mindset and thinking about those as incidents and using the terminology and just kind of practicing can be very helpful to get more comfortable with that big change in structure that you're going to have to do if you get the big one. So respond to those daily things, those business interruptions, but I'd say think about changing your mindset to looking at it as an incident. And those are opportunities to build those relationships, right? I don't know how many of those are going to involve other partners, but to the extent they do, then you can practice those, sharing those responsibilities, things like unified command, like Jake referred to there. The more you can practice those things before you get a really serious incident, the better it'll go when you have that serious incident. And then I think that that last one there is to really have a good formal process of after action review to document, what worked, what didn't, particularly if you're, trying to get more proficient at ICS and you put on some different hats, play some different roles. It's good to review that when you're done and say, are we comfortable with that? Did it work? Because it's going to be it's different than your normal roles and responsibilities. It just is. So I think there's a couple examples on the next slide of some response pieces that you guys were involved with. Jake, you want to talk about that flood incident? I'm familiar with public safety power shutoffs, but not sure what you're involved with.
It's good that you're not familiar with floods because it's like once in every 6 years. So I just thought again to share more examples here, just like with the training and with the response and what we continue to do. There's the public safety power shutoff, just an example of these emerging threats that Kurt talked about in the opening, that it just seems to be continuous. It is what it is, but it's our job to prepare for, mitigate, and respond to them. That's a picture of Roberto, just getting a standby, I remember right, he's getting standby generator ready so that the Canyon Heights booster can have power when PG&E turned off the power. On the left is, if you could play that, Marion. Yeah, this is a flood. I think everybody here is familiar with, you know, but again, they don't happen very often. I think I know 2 in my 6 years here. And again, just something that I show that to show that what the daily capabilities director, but also how it shows there is, you know, the capabilities we have and the mindset that we have. That there, you know, that incident there was very complex. You know, obviously, again, takes all of the utility workers over multiple hours. Shireen has to get involved right away, our public affairs with messaging, so that the public's aware of what's going on. Myself and Justin, working with the safety officer, working with the homeowners to, you know, ensure they got a place to stay. They understand how to seek insurance claims, and also just keep them informed for when the water flows back on. And it was a complex incident. You know, it's homeowners. There's PG&E was there due to had to shut off some power because of due to the level of the water. Fremont Fire, multiple agencies. So again, just some more examples of the daily stuff we'll continue to do.
Okay, thanks, Jake. Okay, let's move on. We've got a couple more slides here, then we'll get turn things back to you guys for discussion. So mutual aid, that's a key part of any organization's kind of backbone, if you will, for larger incidents. And it does work both ways, right? You help others when they need it, and of course you hope that favor is returned when you become in need. So you've got a variety of different mutual aid agreements in place, and I think it's important to make sure they're fresh. I think we looked through a couple of them. Mutual aid agreements can get out of date, so that's another thing in addition to your plans that you do want to periodically review and update. I've been involved in a couple of situations in Oregon where we discovered mutual aid agreements were well out of date and just failed us in a critical incident. So I encourage you to do that. And then I think we're going to focus in the next slide specifically in on the California Utility Emergency Association as a resource that you guys have available to help you. And is Don Boland on the phone, or is he on virtually?
Yep, I am on the phone.
Don,
Can
you
hear
want
me?
to? Yes, we can. Can you give us the high points of?
I'll give you a 50,000 foot foggy flyover. CUEA handles mutual aid for power, water, wastewater, telecommunications, cable, and gas, and pipeline. So in the event you have a catastrophic event and you need to call on cell towers, we can procure them. We are housed in the OES headquarters. CUA staff is based in the OES headquarters. We have a utility operations center wholly contained within the state's operations center, in which we bring parties together to resolve the surge mutual assistance that utilities may need or call upon. And that utility can be, as yours would be, and you have referred to in this evening's conversation, to earthquakes. So I will use that as an example. On July 4th of 2019, we happened to have the Ridgecrest earthquake, which impacted Searles Valley Water Company. When the general manager called, she said, "I only have 12 employees, Don. I need mutual assistance." Within 1 day, we turned out 52 personnel from 5 different water companies and 1 state agency, from engineers to surveyors to journeymen, with appropriate backhoes, dump trucks, flatbeds. We were able to set 3 water tanks back on their foundations. They had over 1,500 leaks in which we were able to assist in addressing. And one of the most difficult challenges was the China Lakes Naval Air Station, which was fed by Searless, but needed escorts, special permitting, IDs, and clearance for all of the personnel entering China Lakes, in which we were able to facilitate. By being based in the OES headquarters, we have direct access to our other state agency partners, DWR, CHP, Caltrans, and of course the private sectors, which came in with material and supplies. So through your pact with CUEA, you have unlimited access to any of these utilities, including fellow water companies, to provide logistics, base camps, material, manpower, or equipment. So that's your 50,000 foot flyover.
Great. That sounds like a great resource. Okay, I think we're done with the presentation portion. I'm going to turn it back to Jake. We're certainly available to help answer questions.
All right, thanks, Don and Sherry. If you could just hold on a few seconds because we're moving to the discussion portion here. There we go. So I guess, yeah, we just finished the plan to move forward. So I'll stop for questions and also just remind the board and anybody else, you know, we do have experts in the room and virtually with waterworks engineers, utility response training associates, Westios, and CUEA. So that said,
questions from Gunther?
okay, you guys only have 10 seconds and I get to walk out of here.
Um,
I'm joking.
Okay, then let me.
I have some comments, not necessarily questions.
What's that?
I have some comments, maybe not necessarily questions.
Oh,
Please
yeah, I'll
go
take
ahead.
it.
I think we've done a pretty decent job of responding to what we've had to do. We've had our share of incidents. We've had a couple that did involve the railroad. I noticed on our list, we have the UP Railroad on here. It's vital. Main lines coming right through our town. Main comment, sending employees to other sites. We've been very active in that. Christina, the earthquake up in Napa, the fires, vital. You can't get any better than that. That's where you're going to get your experience.
Yeah.
The system, the guys going in there that are the employee that goes up there, what's he in charge of? Tires. You know, or vehicle maintenance.
Oh, with Adam?
Yeah.
He was actually doing underground service alerts and also repairing some meters.
Yeah. So that
hands-on
was,
stuff.
I was thinking back to the Sonoma fire, I think, or when we sent 2 guys.
Oh, yeah. Dan was in charge of logistics. That's what you're thinking of. Dan and I were in logistics.
Yeah,
at the OC.
something as simple as logistics.
Yeah.
For my job, one of my training courses I have to teach is ICS. And most people don't fully understand what ICS is. ICS needs to be flexible. And the only way to get that ability to understand what that flexibility is when they hear people, oh, we're sending water district employees to a fire situation. Why are we doing that? Why would our guy go to logistics? Our guy goes to logistics because you don't have time when there's an incident in a fire to figure out how you're going to get your trucks fixed. It is important. I agree with Director Weed. We have facilities here, wells have been decommissioned. Probably a good idea to look in, can we have those things set up to operate in an emergency? Good idea. Maybe grant money there. I don't know if we have that ability to fire up one of those and pipe it into the system, run it into trucks. Going back to Loma Prieta, not Loma Prieta, Oakland Hills fire. Back then, fire departments didn't even have connectors that were common. Loma Prieta, same problem. We learned from our mistakes. We also learned from sending our people. The concept of if we need to have people coming in, do we have employees to assist? Liberty had what, 2 people maybe when we went there? And there's no infrastructure to support you. The Exxon Valdez, there was no infrastructure to support the people that went up there, let alone the people they were sending. So these are things that you have to have the flexibility. I believe we have that flexibility. Can you write it into your plan? I don't know. But you have to be flexible enough to do that. And I think that's the most critical part of our plan. The ICS system is that we're flexible. We can make those shifts if we have to. Because if the earthquake hits us real hard, we're not going to have places for people to stay. We're not going to have water to feed them or food to feed them, water, places for them to stay. We're going to have to rely on somebody else to bring that in. Why? You're going to have to. We can't store enough tents to bring in people to do it. The Exxon Valdez, the Navy sent vessels up there to berth people because there was no room for anybody to stay. And we were sending people from Coast Guard headquarters to Valdez. I'm a little off topic, but the point is, yes, the logistics is valuable to know where we want to do it. We can do that, but we have to be flexible. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay.
I thank you for the compliments, Director.
Thank you. My comments, first of all, talking the very general and organizational. Should we consider a committee of to address issues related to contingency operations that include everyone within the each of the departments in the organization? We currently have an IOC, which is has a function, and we train the people in that function. But have we had meetings or with each of the department heads to discuss and have them think about how they would respond if we had to repurpose their organization and their operations?
So,
and do we have it within our labor contracts, being government employees, to be able to take on those emergency responsibilities?
So the start, kind of a multi-answer here. We don't have employees respond, all employees trained to help in some extent to all particular business interruptions. But to make sense of all this, we do have the starting point, which is key, which is a business continuity plan. And in that plan, it focuses on functions. It lists our functions and it prioritizes them and the related staff. And that allows for, frankly, it allows for proper planning. You got to know who you can repurpose. We have a system we manage here 24/7, and it's challenging to. Everyone here wants to volunteer to help. I never have a problem with that, but it's challenging to pull the right people because we perform some critical functions here, and a majority of our staff do. So my answer is the business continuity plan has been a good start because it's not threat specific, it's function. And when you lose a function, it lists contingencies within it. Can the contingencies go deeper, like staffing and facilities and what allows for that function to perform? Yeah, the planning can definitely go deeper, but it's definitely, that plan is definitely a great asset.
Next question, should we have a budget item, a line item for contingency response? We were talking about getting grants for contingency issues. Should we put into our budget some monies to be spent on the various issues that we identify that are needed to support our contingency response?
So that's a bit tricky, John. Like it's how do you budget for something you think will happen, but you don't know. I don't know. If,
Well, we know we are going ahead and putting in certain infrastructure and relationships, building up certain supplies
You're talking about. I thought you
that
meant
would
like
be
for-
ready. Should we have a budget that would allow you to fund that and build it up over time?
I'm sorry. I'm frankly. I'm
Maybe
confused. It's
I
me.
can just kind of jump in real quick.
Yeah.
So in our capital program budget, those dollars are programmed into the CIP to do things like build the infrastructure that we feel is necessary as a mitigation to we even have equipment and so forth in this included in the CIP.
Right.
So we have what we think will be needed, but the trick for us is always reassessing what really will be needed. And generally when that happens, we're adding stuff to the CIP because we find additional areas that we want to bolster. Our infrastructure in terms of water storage, water transmission, and so forth. We have, as the board knows, we've done a whole lot of work in that area trying to identify what we feel is necessary for hardening our system and providing for redundancy and so forth. And so those items are budgeted in the CIP. What we don't have is like an operating budget line item that that has dollars in there that we're not actually planning to spend in a particular fiscal year, right? So we're not budgeting right now specific dollars in an operating budget to spend to address something that hasn't happened. We do have emergency reserves, we have emergency line of credit, and we have reserves and cash available, but to repurpose in an event like that. But we don't have separate budgeted line items in an operating budget for that.
Oh, all right, that would, let me encourage you to consider identifying O&M monies that could be better be spent now than to have to spend them and when the event occurs. And that is a part of that preparation funding source. Maybe some specifics though. We had an AMI project. We now can tell you how much water is being used by every meter. To my knowledge, we've not put any instrumentation on a hydrant. In an emergency, our challenge is to provide fire flows. We have no way currently to determine whether we have the capacity and capability in real time to provide those fire flows.
Well, SCADA, so SCADA monitors our pressure and our flow. That determines capacity.
In the overall system, but how are they adequate to meet the needs of a response? Do we know?
So I'm trying to just understand you better, Director. So we do, we provide fire flow daily, if not daily, often. Are you talking about like for a major, what's the scenario?
Well, I'm saying that we could, we had direct information that would be one way to determine, as opposed to the general area-wide SCADA flows, whether or not you could provide a fire service at specific points that the firefighters go to. And then find ways to augment if they don't have it through a well system in the groundwater.
Yes,
reservoir.
so yeah, we have relationships with Alameda County's 2 contract fire departments, and then Fremont, Alameda County with Union Senior. And I hear it come across our radio, or it comes over the phone to our operations and maintenance office assistants when there's an issue, 24/7. So we get the information quickly, and our operators that's without a demand for fire flow. Daily they deal with where to push water. It's just part of running the system. I don't know if does that answer your question? I think we already do what you're.
I think it's an area that I would encourage you to evaluate and see if there's ways we could give specific information as to where we're able to provide those fire flows and where we're not.
Yeah, so we can model our system, whether intact or model it with an assumed set of compromised parts, right? The trick is having perfect information, and I think that's where you're kind of going with
Yes.
AMI.
If we just spent $50-60 million get with data automation on every one of our customers. What do we know on our own system on critical components?
Okay, so how
Do-
AMI can help feed?
Do we have a
information? Yeah, is that what I'm-
GIS-based information system that can tell us what our real-time operational capabilities are and where we're providing water and where we're not?
So I think what Director Weed is saying is that, is it possible to leverage on AMI, for example, put a meter by a individual fire hydrant? So in case of a major disaster, for example, you could tell Fremont Fire that, hey, we know the fire hydrant at the corner of Paseo and Deep
Right.
Creek is
Okay.
functioning and has adequate pressure. I think that's ultimately where Director Weed would like to go. Am
Well,
I hearing that correctly?
There's something called intelligent hydrants, which are being put out on the market now, and they're units you can attach to a hydrant. They can tell you what its water pressure is and whether there's water flowing, et cetera. So those components currently exist. We're doing some currently to listen for leaks, but I don't know that we have anything that measures the operational capability of each fire hydrant, which strikes me as being as important as knowing what how much water each meter is using.
So I think what I would propose is that when we look at our emergency response, specifically to the earthquake chapter
Right.
that I'm sure we're working on, just give this a thought to
Yeah.
see, is
No,
there a
right.
way to tell or model from our system to perhaps identify several central locations within each community where we could point the firefighters to say, these are a set of hydrants that most likely will work under the scenario. Or perhaps we could take it one step further, saying we will harden these hydrants to make sure that these are the distribution points, right? You have different options, but just take a look when you're
Yeah.
working on that response chapter
I
refresh.
will, and I'll get more familiar with AMI.
Part of that paradigm shift is not, we talked about modeling, which we're okay at, but having real-time specific information that you can provide to the field and that they can access.
Right.
And one way to do that is a GIS system that not only we have access to, but that the community has access to.
Yeah, I can't give you an answer now, but I've definitely, we've shared that information, and Aras and I are definitely share everything we can. And I think these security strengths that you may have been told in the past may not be such a concern on GIS anymore.
I'm a bit concerned, but I think you're saying, do we not have security protocols that limit and much of this information to keep it in-house so that it's not shared with any outside
Yeah.
party?
It depends. In all the scenarios, we've shared GIS information, say for a planned outage for a distribution repair to the public. We've shared GIS information to the county during a large scale exercise, so they know what our pressure zones are and how it's affecting their customers.
We give it to the county, but not individual customers. If
Only
so,
one-
an individual
yeah.
wanted to dial in on their personal computer to find out what's going on,
No, we
that
define
is
it,
what I'm
yeah.
suggesting we should do in
Okay.
an emergency.
We could
Yeah, I
definitely-
think kind of what I'm taking from some of this is one of the things that we need to be thinking about is who needs to know what in the event of, and I think you're thinking about a very large scale disaster kind of event. I'm thinking you're probably.
Even a neighborhood event, if their neighborhood
Okay,
is out.
yeah. So, but we're talking about emergency services and what information do they have available from us in terms of the status of the system and so forth. So I think some of this I think it's good feedback to be thinking about. And then, as a next step, as we sort of further refine our planning and thinking, to me, it's, conversation with emergency service, with the fire department and so forth. What do you need from us in what scenarios? And how could we better communicate in those situations so that as we're planning our mitigations and as we're planning what our response is going to be, we can make sure that we're programming in whatever changes would be appropriate in order to achieve that. So that's kind of the way I'm taking some of this.
Oh, that's fine. And at the risk of getting into too much detail, getting for too down into, I'll throw out two other quick ideas. One is to identify the potential for a nursery that people can take their children and have them put on site so that we, because these are family people who otherwise are not going to be here on the job. And that's their first priority. And the second is look at a type of a metallic sign that people can put on their personal vehicles, because we're going to quickly run out of operate our own vehicles, and they should be able to be identified as being water district employees, keep it in the trunk of their car, put it on the side. And we now have converted them from a POV to a district vehicle and have the insurance and other protocols in place that they're protected when they're utilizing them. Those are the type of mindset of how you do that expansion and change our overall way of doing business.
Noted. All right, anything else?
Well, we do have a member of the public that.
Do we have a hand up?
Oh, we had. Not anymore. Okay, I see. Actually, I have a question for Don Bolin. Is Don still there?
Of course.
Don, this is Ed Stevenson, and I have a question. And it's relates to a question that comes up on our end occasionally, and that is, we're talking about mutual aid. Now, I think you used the term unlimited. Certainly, our agency is constrained in terms of how much mutual aid we can host, manage, and support ourselves, right? So if we have a very large scale disaster that requires a great deal of mutual aid to come in, far more than say 50 individuals or persons coming from out of the area, we're going to need help with not only the mutual aid, but also the management of that mutual aid, the housing of people, the maintenance of equipment, whatever else would go along with that sort of a scaling up of an operation like that. How does that happen in real life?
Well, in real life, we have done this numerous times in my 15 years of heading the organization. We would procure a base camp and an ICS team. We would go to those such as LADWP, DWR, MDW, and bring in a control team to assist you in procuring the housing, the food, the medical, the transport, even the fuel question is going to come into account. We have done this for base camps for PG&E up to 2,800 people. So we have the flexibility to grow. We have the access to the major utility providers, all 42 power companies in California that have a great deal of expertise. Now, the one critical aspect is we are not mutual aid. Mutual aid is fire, law. We are mutual assistance. The fundamental difference is that is a contract to repay the troops and the materials in which you incur in a mutual assistance contract. But we can scale it to any size needed. We handled the Sandy response, which was the largest single private sector response in California's history. 2,800 power people went from California, which did not have the disaster, out to Sandy, the 13 states on the East Coast. And the only restriction I had was in a meeting with Governor Brown. He did not wish that we pulled the resources that would support California if we had a catastrophic earthquake at the same time Sandy was underway on the East Coast. So again, in the ICS world, we would scale it up to meet the surge needs of the requesting company.
Thank you, Don. I appreciate it. I was happy to take advantage of having you on the line right here in order to ask that question. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Scott's also retired high up in CAL FIRE, and base camp is like bread and butter. If there's any questions regarding that, I mean, it's
Scott and I know each other exceptionally well. He started in Reading.
So any questions, get them out now because we got the experts here for sure that can either reassure or show where we can improve.
All right. Do you prioritize to those people who are going or have the capacity to be able to take the people immediately? Because we might have a high school gym that we can put them in with shower facilities, et cetera, versus someone who needs to be put in and where you have to come in and establish a base camp for them?
Don, I don't know if you heard.
Yeah.
I think I'll let
Go
Don first. I forgot to ask Scott too. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, base camps can be public buildings. The issue with that is you're in competition, or a public building, a grade school, a high school, will not accommodate AFN. So you need to be cautious. Generally, we have on contracts base camp companies. East Bay Mud does, LADWP, PG&E. CAL FIRE will provide the assistance and the direction. They're exceptionally good at it. They do it enough, but going into a public building has its own challenges. Sometimes you're better getting an independent base camp, setting up cows and colts, setting up our cable providers, and having it independent of a given structure.
Okay. And what is the timeline for setting up a base camp?
Well, the timeline is depicted on the requests coming in. If you're the only one or you're competing with state and federal agencies. The other issue is generally they will run anywhere from 5 to 14 days to roll and get them built. In my previous life, I was a vice president for a utility company. We had base camp providers under contract and under a 7-day setup anywhere in the country. And I had used them several times. Katrina, I built 5 base camps in 15 days. And they housed 6,000 employees.
1 to 2 weeks to come up to speed and then go from there. All right, thank you.
Okay, well, if there are no further questions or any other comments, then we'll take the feedback that we received today and give it some thought. And I don't know, Kurt or Jake, if you want to talk about our thoughts about considering this information and moving forward.
No, it's just all, yes, it's all noted. And like always, it's all worth spending some time. It's a matter of how far to go. And I think there's a lot of clarity from all ends, to include myself today. Everybody's learned even more and has some more clarity. And we'll take the comments from all 3 directors and review. Then we'll return.
Let me throw out one more general thought. We run the risk of losing our imported water supply for an extended period of time. Right now, 40% is state water, which is the South Bay Aqueduct. Another 20% had Chechi. We could lose those. We could even lose much of the access to the imported water coming in on the Alameda Creek. Therefore, that raises the question, should we not be looking at the ability to run for an extended period of time our entire system on the groundwater reservoir? And that would suggest that we change some of our capital construction program to be able to take water from our well fields to the other regions of our district that we are currently served by a water treatment plant number 2. So those type of thoughts can hopefully be put into our general planning, that we build that type of resiliency.
Right. And that, yeah, and that effort will, going for an effort will have more wins. Are you talking about immediate concerns with the drought, or are you talking about just in general, anything that can interrupt our supply?
I think if we look, I made a comment earlier that if you look at good contingency planning, oftentimes you'll find that that's a better way to do business than the way you've historically done it. So putting some pumps at Woodfield to be able to take the water from the well field and supply other parts of the district, et cetera, that we may be better suited to rely more heavily on our groundwater basin, using that for non-potable water sources that we're currently taking groundwater and charging $3,000 an acre foot for irrigation. Maybe we don't need to. Maybe you can do it for $500 an acre foot, which is raw well water. That is the mindset change that hopefully as we go into contingency planning, that has a positive benefit on the way we do business overall. Such as putting in natural gas in lieu of solar panels for backup power.
I think that's a
Those type of
difference
things
of
would
opinion,
change from many of our
Director Lee.
decisions we've made to date, which should not have a contingency element in our mindset.
All right.
We did say at one point you were going in too much detail, but then there's a couple more comments. I'm
No,
surprised
that's
you
our
said-
basic way of doing business, and where I think we've been missing the mark in some areas.
I understood. Thanks for your patience with us, and we'll keep at it, Director.
Okay, Jake and Kurt, is that all you have
Thank
to
you.
share then this evening?
I believe so, unless there's any final comments or questions. I think
Just
that's it.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Directors. Good seeing you again.
And thanks to all our
Okay.
guests
Yes,
for
thank you.
coming and supporting. And obviously you've heard a fair amount of discussion. We'll continue the conversation. I have one general manager's report,
Please.
President Weed. Just a reminder that we have our Niles Canyon Stroll and Roll on Sunday. So if you're planning on going out there, you'll see ACWD's sites set up. We're set up a little bit different spot this time on the Fremont side. We are on the sort of south side of Highway 84 this time, alongside the road, as opposed to across the highway at the park. So, but we'll be there with bells on. We'll have our information booth. We'll have our bottled water, our ACWD bottled water available to participants. So it'd be great to see you if you're out there. We also have another hydration station well into the canyon for those folks who are starting to get dehydrated halfway through the journey as they make their way to Sunol. So beyond that, we'll be there the whole day. So if you happen to stop by, we'd like to see you. Beyond that, that completes my general manager's report, sir.
Well, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the support from our consultants.
All right, I think we're adjourned.
We are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.